The golden thread that would unravel 30 years of silence began its dance at exactly 3:47 a.m. when Rachel Morgan's worn sneakers caught the edge of a loose tile in the cardiac wing of Mercy General Hospital. The delicate gold necklace, her only inheritance from a mother she'd never known, slipped from beneath her scrubs as she stumbled, its chain catching the harsh fluorescent light like a whispered prayer. For 28 years it had never left her neck. Not through 17 foster homes, not through nursing school, not through the countless nights she'd traced its intricate Celtic knot while wondering who had loved her enough to leave behind something so beautiful. No. It lay scattered across the sterile floor in 3 broken pieces. Rachel's hands trembled as she gathered the fragments, her heart hammering against her ribs. The necklace wasn't valuable. Costume jewelry, the social worker had said, but it was hers. The only proof that somewhere, once, someone had held her as a baby and chosen this particular piece to keep her safe. Rough night? She looked up to find Marcus Webb, the night security guard, extending a coffee cup. His kind eyes, weathered by years of watching over the hospital's forgotten corners, held the sort of understanding that came from knowing loss intimately. You could say that. Rachel's voice cracked as she slipped the broken pieces into her pocket. Mrs. Chen in 304 is asking for ice chips again, and Mr. Rodriguez's family is driving down from Sacramento. His daughter thinks... She couldn't finish. After 5 years as a cardiac nurse, she'd learned that hope and heartbreak lived in the same breath. Marcus nodded toward the East Wing. New admission came in an hour ago. Private room VIP treatment. Word is he's some big-shot real estate mogul. Collapsed at a charity gala. Stress-induced cardiac episode. Rachel wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The broken necklace felt like shards of glass in her pocket, but duty called. It always did. Room number 312, name's Bennett. Richard Bennett. Marcus's expression darkened slightly. Fair warning. His assistant already complained about the thread count of the sheets. Some people think money can buy them a different kind of suffering. The corridors of Mercy General held secrets in their shadows. Rachel had walked these halls for 5 years, watching families reunite and fall apart, witnessing miracles and tragedies in equal measure. But tonight felt different. The broken necklace pulsed in her pocket like a second heartbeat, and the fluorescent light seemed dimmer, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Room 312 stood at the end of the corridor, its door slightly ajar. Through the gap, Rachel could see expensive luggage stacked beside a leather briefcase, and the glow of multiple phone chargers creating a constellation on the nightstand. Even in crisis, wealth announced itself. She knocked softly and entered. Richard Bennett lay propped against pristine white pillows, his silver hair immaculately styled despite the circumstances. His hands, adorned with a gold signet ring bearing an elaborate family crest, rested atop a cashmere blanket that definitely wasn't hospital issue. Everything about him spoke of control, of a man accustomed to bending the world to his will. About time, he said, without looking up from his tablet. I specifically requested a cardiac specialist. You look barely old enough to take someone's temperature. Rachel had heard worse. The cardiac wing attracted men like Richard Bennett, powerful figures whose hearts had finally rebelled against years of stress and pride. She'd learned to let their words bounce off her like rain on glass. I'm Rachel, your night nurse. How are you feeling, Mr. Bennett? Like I'm paying for a 5-star experience and receiving roadside service. His gray eyes finally met hers, and for a moment, something flickered in their depths. Though I suppose you didn't choose the decor. She moved efficiently around the room, checking his IV line, monitoring his vitals. His heartbeat was steady but elevated, not unusual for a man whose empire was built on high-stakes negotiations. But there was something else in his manner, a restlessness that went beyond physical discomfort. The doctor will be making rounds at 6, Rachel said, making notes on his chart. Is there anything I can get you in the meantime? Ice chips? Extra pillows? Answers, Richard said quietly. But I doubt those are on the menu. Something in his tone made her pause. Beneath the entitled exterior, she recognized a familiar ache, the hollow echo of questions that had no answers. It was the same feeling that had haunted her through every sleepless night, every birthday without cards, every Christmas morning in houses that weren't quite home. Sometimes the questions are harder than the illness, she said softly. Richard's tablet screen dimmed, casting his face in shadow. "You sound like you speak from experience." Rachel's hand instinctively moved toward her pocket, where the broken necklace lay waiting. "We all have our missing pieces, Mr. Bennett." For a moment, the room fell silent except for the gentle beep of medical equipment. Outside, Los Angeles stretched endlessly in all directions, millions of people carrying their own secret wounds through the night. But in room 312, two strangers sat suspended in a bubble of unexpected understanding. Richard's fingers absently turned his signet ring, and Rachel noticed how the overhead light caught the gold, creating the same warm glow she remembered from her necklace. How many nights had she stared at that light, wondering if somewhere someone was looking at something similar and thinking of her? "Get some rest, Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice gentler than before. "Sometimes healing starts when we finally let our guard down." As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Rachel." She turned. "Thank you for—" He gestured vaguely, but she understood. Sometimes gratitude had no words. Walking back down the corridor, Rachel felt the broken necklace shift in her pocket. 3 pieces of a puzzle she'd been trying to solve her entire life. She didn't know it yet, but in 12 hours, those pieces would unlock a mystery that would change everything, not just for her, but for the proud man in room 312 who had spent 30 years searching for a ghost. The golden thread was already beginning to weave its magic. Dawn crept through the hospital, windows like a cautious visitor, painting the corridor walls in soft amber hues. Rachel had been on her feet for 11 hours straight, but sleep felt as distant as the answers she'd been chasing her entire life. In the break room, she carefully laid the pieces of her necklace on a paper towel, trying to see how they might fit back together. The clasp was broken, and one section of chain had completely separated, but the pendant, a delicate Celtic knot, remained intact. As she examined it under the harsh fluorescent light, she noticed something she'd never seen before: tiny markings along the edge, so small they were almost invisible. Still here, Marcus appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee and the weary smile of someone who'd seen too many sunrise shifts. "Thought you went home an hour ago." "Couldn't sleep anyway." Rachel accepted the coffee gratefully, cupping it in both hands to warm her fingers. "Marcus, you've worked here longer than anyone. Do you know anything about having jewelry repaired? Somewhere local?" He settled into the plastic chair across from her, his knees creaking audibly. "My late wife used to take her grandmother's ring to a place downtown. Little shop called Romano's. Been there since the 50s. Old Italian guy, real craftsman. Why?" Rachel gestured to the broken pieces. "Family heirloom. Only thing I have from my mother." Marcus leaned forward, squinting at the pendant. "That's some beautiful work. Celtic, right? My wife had Irish roots. She always said those knots represented eternal connection. No beginning, no end. Eternal connection," Rachel repeated softly. "To what?" she wondered. "To whom? You heading there today?" "After I get some sleep." She carefully wrapped the pieces in the paper towel. "Mr. Bennett seems stable. How's he been?" Marcus's expression shifted. "Restless. Been making phone calls since 5 a.m. Something about property acquisitions and board meetings. Man had a cardiac episode 12 hours ago, and he's already trying to run his empire from bed. Some people don't know how to be vulnerable. Ain't that the truth?" Marcus stood slowly, his security radio crackling to life with the morning shift change. "But I'll tell you something interesting. Around 4 a.m., I found him sitting in the visitor's lounge, just staring out the window. When I asked if he needed anything, he said he was waiting for a sign. Seemed like a man carrying some heavy ghosts." Rachel nodded, remembering the brief moment of connection they'd shared in the darkness. There had been something in Richard Bennett's eyes, a recognition of shared loss that transcended their different worlds. "Room 312 requesting assistance," came the voice from the intercom. Rachel sighed, downing the rest of her coffee. No rest for the weary. "Go on," Marcus said. "I'll keep an eye on your necklace. It's fine, I'll take it with me." She carefully pocketed the wrapped pieces. Some things you don't leave behind. The morning shift was beginning to arrive, a parade of fresh faces and clean scrubs replacing the night warriors who'd held the fort through the dark hours. Rachel felt the familiar pang of displacement that came with being between worlds, neither fully day nor night staff, neither fully belonging anywhere. Room 312's door stood open, revealing Richard Bennett sitting upright in bed, his laptop balanced on the rolling table. Even in a hospital gown, he managed to project an air of command, though Rachel noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he typed, "Good morning, Mr. Bennett. Feeling better?" "Define better," he said without looking up. "My assistant is fielding calls about a merger that should have closed yesterday. My board thinks I'm having a nervous breakdown, and my cardiologist wants to keep me here for another 48 hours for observation." He finally glanced at her. "But my chest pain is manageable, if that's what you're asking." Rachel began her routine checks, noting that his color had improved overnight. "Sometimes our bodies force us to slow down when we won't do it ourselves." Profound wisdom from someone who's been working an 11-hour shift. She paused in taking his blood pressure. "Touché." For a moment, his stern expression softened. "I'm sorry. That was unnecessarily sharp. You've been nothing but professional and kind. Apology accepted." Rachel finished her assessment, noting the numbers on his chart. "Your vitals are improving. The rest is doing you good whether you admit it or not." Richard closed his laptop with a decisive snap. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Last night you mentioned missing pieces. You seem to understand something about—" He struggled for words. "About carrying questions without answers." Rachel felt the broken necklace shift in her pocket, its pieces pressing against her leg like tiny reminders. "Everyone has a story they're trying to piece together, Mr. Bennett. Some of us just have fewer clues to work with." "I've been searching for someone for 30 years, he said quietly. "My younger sister. She disappeared when she was just 16. I was away at college building what I thought was important." His fingers found his signet ring again, turning it absently. "By the time I realized what really mattered, she was gone." Rachel felt her breath catch. "Gone how?" "Foster care. Our parents died in a car accident, and I was too young, too stupid, too focused on my own future to fight for custody. The system scattered us like leaves." His voice grew rough. "I've hired investigators, searched databases, followed leads that went nowhere. She could be anywhere. She could be—" He couldn't finish. "She could be standing right in front of you," Rachel said softly. Richard's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the space between them seemed to shimmer with possibility. But then reality reasserted itself. She was a nurse from the night shift. He was a millionaire real estate mogul, and the world didn't work in such neat coincidences. "I should let you rest," Rachel said, stepping back from the bed. "Wait." Richard's voice was urgent. "You said you had something from your mother. May I ask what it is?" Rachel's hand moved instinctively to her pocket. Something in his tone made her hesitate. "A necklace. Celtic knot pendant. It's broken now, but—" Richard Bennett went completely still. Even the machines seemed to quiet in the sudden silence. "Celtic knot," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, why?" But Richard had closed his eyes, his hands gripping the bed rail so tightly his knuckles had gone white. When he opened them again, tears had gathered in the corners. "My sister loved Celtic mythology, said the knots represented connections that could never be broken, no matter how far apart people drifted." His voice was shaking now. "Before she went into foster care, I gave her a necklace. Gold chain, Celtic knot pendant. I told her it would keep us connected until I could find her again." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Rachel's hand trembled as she reached into her pocket, her fingers closing around the wrapped pieces of her broken necklace. "Mr. Bennett," she whispered, "what was your sister's name?" "Rebecca," he said, and the name hung in the air between them like a prayer. "Rebecca Morgan Bennett." The paper towel crinkled like autumn leaves as Rachel's trembling fingers unwrapped the broken necklace. Time seemed suspended in room 312, as if the universe itself was holding its breath for the revelation that would either shatter two hearts or heal a wound 3 decades in the making. Richard Bennett's face had gone ashen, his successful businessman's composure crumbling as he stared at the delicate gold pieces in Rachel's palm. The Celtic knot pendant caught the morning light, casting tiny dancing reflections on the hospital room walls. "Morgan was my adoptive name," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle hum of medical equipment. "The social worker said they found me with just this necklace and a note that said, 'Keep her safe. Keep her loved.'" Richard's hands were shaking as he reached for his wallet, his movements careful and deliberate. From behind a collection of credit cards and business papers, he withdrew a small faded photograph. The edges were worn smooth from years of handling, and the colors had begun to fade, But the image was clear enough. A young man with kind eyes standing beside a dark-haired girl who wore an identical Celtic knot necklace. "Rebecca at 16, he said, his voice breaking. 2 days before the accident that changed everything, Rachel took the photograph with reverence as if it were made of spun glass. The girl in the picture had her same nose, the same stubborn set to her jaw, the same way of tilting her head slightly to the left. But it was the eyes that convinced her, eyes that held the same quiet strength, the same resilience born of too many goodbyes. "I remember you," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Not clearly, but I remember feeling safe with someone tall, someone who smelled like books and coffee, someone who promised he'd come back. Richard's composure finally broke entirely. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he reached toward her, his hand stopping just short of touching her face, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "I looked everywhere," he whispered. "Hired the best investigators, searched every database, followed every lead. They told me you'd been placed in a loving home, that it was better for everyone if I didn't interfere. I was 22 and stupid enough to believe them. I was never in one home long enough to matter," Rachel said, her own tears beginning to fall. 17 different families, some kind, some less so. But I kept the necklace, and I kept wondering if somewhere someone was thinking about the little girl who'd been lost. The magnitude of the moment pressed down on them both. 30 years of parallel lives, of wondering and searching and grieving. 30 years of Christmas mornings and birthday wishes spent on a ghost. And now in a sterile hospital room at dawn, the impossible had become reality. "How do we know for certain?" Rachel asked, though her heart had already accepted the truth. "How do we prove what we both know?" Richard reached for his phone with hands that were steadier now, purpose replacing shock. "DNA test, if you're willing." "But Rebecca..." He stopped, correcting himself. "Rachel, I don't need a test to know who you are. You have our mother's eyes and our father's stubborn chin. You tilt your head the exact way she did when she was thinking. And you're wearing the necklace I bought at a little Celtic shop in Boston, the summer before everything changed." "Richard," she said, testing his name on her tongue. It felt familiar, like a word she'd known in another life. "I've dreamed about having family, but I never imagined it would happen like this. I never imagined my brother would be..." She gestured around the hospital room, taking in the expensive belongings and the obvious markers of wealth. "A demanding patient who probably made your job miserable?" Richard asked with a watery smile. "I was going to say successful," Rachel laughed through her tears. "But that works too." The laughter broke some of the tension, creating space for the reality of their situation to settle. They were strangers who were family, separated by decades of different experiences and social classes, united by a broken necklace and the stubborn persistence of love. "I need to ask you something," Richard said, his voice growing serious. "And I need you to be completely honest with me." Rachel nodded, bracing herself. "Are you happy? Are you safe? Have you built a life that brings you joy?" The questions cut straight to the heart of everything she'd been carrying. "I'm okay," she said automatically, then caught herself. "No, that's not honest. I'm surviving. I'm good at my job, I help people. I have friends here at the hospital. But there's always been this feeling that I was waiting for something. Like I was holding my breath for a life that might never come." Richard closed his eyes, pain etched in every line of his face. "I'm so sorry. I should have fought harder, should have ignored the social workers and the lawyers and found you anyway. You were 22 and dealing with your own grief," Rachel said firmly. "We can't change the past, Richard. We can only decide what to do with right now." "What do you want to do with right now?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with 30 years of possibility and pain. Rachel looked at the broken necklace in her hand, then at the photograph of herself as a child, then at this man who had somehow materialized from her deepest dreams. "I want to get to know my brother," she said simply. "I want to hear about our parents, about what you remember from before. I want to understand how you built this life, and I want you to know about mine. I want to fix this necklace, and maybe learn why our mother chose this particular symbol to keep us connected." "The eternal knot," Richard said softly. "No beginning, no end." Outside room 312, the hospital was waking up fully. The day shift taking over from exhausted night workers, families arriving for visiting hours, the complex dance of healing continuing its ancient rhythm. But inside, time moved differently. Inside, two pieces of a long-broken puzzle had finally found each other. Rachel looked at her watch and realized her shift had ended an hour ago. She should be going home, should be collapsing into bed after 11 hours on her feet. Instead, she settled into the visitor's chair beside her brother's bed. "Tell me about the day I disappeared," she said. Richard took a deep breath, his fingers finding his signet ring, the same gold that had once adorned their father's hand, the same symbol of family that had survived when everything else was lost. "It was October 15th, 1994, he began. "The leaves were just starting to turn, and you'd been collecting them for a school project. And in the golden morning light streaming through the hospital windows, 30 years of silence finally found its voice." The story Richard told unfolded like a roadmap to a country Rachel had never known existed, yet somehow recognized as home. Their parents, James and Catherine Bennett, had been college professors. He in literature, she in art history. They lived in a modest house in Cambridge, Massachusetts, surrounded by books and paintings and the comfortable chaos of academic life. Richard was away at Harvard on a full scholarship, studying business against his father's gentle protests. "Commerce over classics, son. Your Shakespearean ancestors are weeping." "You were always drawing," Richard remembered, his voice growing warmer as the memories surfaced. "Mom said you had her artistic eye. You'd cover every spare piece of paper with these elaborate fairy tales, castles and princesses and brave knights. Dad used to say you were illustrating the stories he wished he could write." Rachel found herself crying again, not from sadness this time, but from the overwhelming relief of finally having a history. "I still draw," she whispered. "Sketches mostly during break times. I never knew why, but I always felt compelled to create something beautiful." "It's in your blood," Richard said simply. Mom's family were artists going back generations. Irish immigrants who brought their love of Celtic art and storytelling to America. The necklace was hers first, a gift from her grandmother, who said it would protect the women of our family and keep them connected across time and distance. The weight of that legacy settled around Rachel's shoulders like a warm cloak. She wasn't just Rebecca Morgan, the orphan nurse. She was part of a lineage of artists and dreamers and survivors. "What happened the day they died?" she asked softly. Richard's expression darkened, and she watched him retreat behind the protective walls he'd built over 3 decades. "October 15th. They were driving to my college to watch me in a debate tournament. I was so proud, so eager to show them I was making something of myself. The other car ran a red light. He couldn't finish, and I was at school? Soccer practice. You were only 9, but you played with girls twice your size and never backed down. When the social worker came to get you, Coach Martinez told me you asked if you could finish the game first." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Even then you had this incredible sense of duty." Rachel thought about the countless nights she'd worked double shifts, staying late to comfort frightened patients, arriving early to ensure proper handoffs. That sense of duty had shaped her entire life, driving her toward a profession built on caring for others. "Why didn't you fight the custody decision?" Richard's hands clenched into fists, and for the first time since she'd walked into his room, she saw the steel that had built his business empire. "I tried, but I was 22, grieving, completely overwhelmed by funeral arrangements and legal paperwork. The social worker, Ms. Harrison, I'll never forget her name, convinced me that you needed stability, not an older brother who was barely an adult himself. She said she had a family lined up, people who desperately wanted a daughter. 'The Morgans,' Rachel said. 'They kept me for 6 months, then decided I was too difficult. Apparently I cried too much and asked too many questions about my family.'" Richard flinched as if she'd struck him. "If I had known, if I had realized they were lying about the loving home part, you would have what? Dropped out of Harvard? Given up your future? Richard, you were a kid too." "I would have kept my promise," he said fiercely. "I promised you I'd come back. The day they took you away, I promised." The room fell silent except for the steady beep of monitors. Rachel studied her brother's face, seeing decades of guilt carved into the lines around his eyes. How much of his driven, relentless success had been fueled by the need to prove he was worthy of keeping promises? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Patricia Reeves, Richard's cardiologist, entered with a warm smile that faltered slightly when she noticed Rachel's tear-streaked face. "Good morning." "Mr. Bennett, how are we feeling today?" She paused, looking between them. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you had family visiting." "This is my sister," Richard said, his voice filled with wonder as if he couldn't quite believe the words were true. "Dr. Reeves, meet Rebecca. Rachel, my sister." Dr. Reeves glanced at Rachel's scrubs and hospital ID badge with obvious confusion. "Your sister works here?" "We just found each other," Rachel explained. "Last night, actually. It's complicated." "Found each other?" Dr. Reeves looked intrigued, despite her professional demeanor. "May I ask how?" Richard and Rachel exchanged glances, and for the first time since childhood, they shared a moment of perfect understanding. "A broken necklace," Richard said, "and a stubborn patient who noticed details," Rachel added. Dr. Reeves shook her head with amazement. "In 20 years of medicine, I've seen some remarkable coincidences, but this..." She focused back on Richard. "How are you feeling about this revelation? Any chest pain, shortness of breath, increased anxiety?" "Quite the opposite," Richard said. "For the first time in 30 years, I feel like I can breathe properly. Well, your heart rate is elevated, but given the circumstances, that's understandable. I'd like to keep you another day for observation, but your numbers are much improved." Dr. Reeves made notes in his chart. "Try to keep the excitement to manageable levels and get some actual rest between reunions." After she left, Richard turned back to Rachel. "There's something else you need to know," he said, his voice growing serious. "About my business, about the life I've built. The money, the success, none of it was an accident. Every acquisition, every deal, every penny I've made has been part of searching for you." Rachel frowned. "I don't understand." "Bennett Properties doesn't just buy real estate. We specialize in community development, particularly in areas with high foster care populations. Every project includes community centers, educational programs, support services for displaced families." His eyes were intense now, burning with purpose. "I've been building a network, hoping that someday, somewhere, you might need help and my resources would be there waiting." The implications hit Rachel like a wave. "The new pediatric wing here at Mercy General, funded by Bennett Properties Foundation, yes. The children's home across the street, the job training center, the scholarship program for kids aging out of foster care, all of it. I've been trying to fix a system that failed both of us." Rachel stared at him in amazement. "You've been searching for me by helping other kids like us." "I couldn't save you," Richard said softly. "But maybe I could save someone else's sister, someone else's brother." In that moment, Rachel understood something profound about the man her brother had become. His success wasn't about ego or greed. It was about love transformed into action, grief channeled into purpose. He'd built an empire not to prove his worth, but to ensure no other family would be scattered like leaves in an uncaring wind. "I need to tell you something too," she said, "about why I became a nurse, about the choices I've made." But before she could continue, her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "Romano's Jewelry opens at 10. Want company for the necklace repair?" Rachel showed Richard the message. "My friend Marcus. He told me about a place that might be able to fix the necklace." Richard smiled, the first genuinely happy expression she'd seen from him. "Then let's go fix what's been broken. Both of us. You're supposed to stay in bed for observation. Dr. Reeves said my heart rate is elevated but stable. Besides," Richard's eyes twinkled with mischief, "what's the point of having influence if you can't use it to take your newly discovered sister on her first family outing in 30 years? Looking at her brother, successful, stubborn, and suddenly as eager as a schoolboy planning an adventure, Rachel felt something shift inside her chest. The careful walls she'd built around her heart were crumbling, making room for something she'd never dared hope for: belonging. "Okay," she said, "let's go fix our necklace." Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the corridor or the phone call being made from the hospital's administrative offices. Neither of them realized that their reunion had not gone unnoticed, and that some secrets, once disturbed, create ripples that extend far beyond the people who hold them. The golden thread was weaving a pattern larger than they could imagine. Romano's Jewelry sat wedged between a vintage bookstore and a coffee shop on a tree-lined street in downtown Los Angeles, its narrow storefront barely wider than a doorway. The painted sign above the entrance had faded to the color of old parchment, but the window display showcased pieces that gleamed with the kind of craftsmanship that belonged to an earlier era Richard had insisted on signing himself out of the hospital against medical advice. One day of missed observation won't kill me. And 30 years of missed opportunities nearly did. And now sat beside Rachel in the back of an Uber, both of them staring at the small jewelry shop, like pilgrims approaching a shrine. "Are you nervous?" Rachel asked, her fingers carefully cradling the wrapped pieces of the necklace. "Terrified," Richard admitted. "What if it can't be repaired? What if we're building this moment up too much? Then we'll have it made into 2 pendants," Rachel said firmly. "One for each of us. The connection doesn't have to look exactly like it did before to still be real." The driver pulled to the curb, and Richard immediately reached for his wallet, but Rachel was faster, handing over cash with practiced efficiency. "I can afford cab fare." "Rebecca," Richard said with gentle exasperation. "It's Rachel," she corrected automatically, then paused. "Though I suppose I could try Rebecca again. See how it feels. Only if you want to. Names are just labels. They don't change who you are." Inside Romano's, the air smelled of metal polish and time. Glass cases lined the walls, filled with engagement rings and vintage brooches, pocket watches and lockets that whispered stories of love and loss. Behind the main counter, an elderly man with silver hair and gentle hands examined a delicate bracelet through a jeweler's loop. "Mr. Romano." Rachel approached the counter hesitantly. He looked up, his dark eyes crinkling with the kind of warmth that came from a lifetime of helping people commemorate their most precious moments. "How can I help you today?" Rachel unwrapped the broken necklace, laying the pieces carefully on the felt-covered counter. "We were hoping you might be able to repair this. It's very important to us." Romano set down his loop and leaned forward, studying the Celtic knot pendant with the reverence of someone who understood that jewelry often carried more weight than gold. "Beautiful piece. Very old, probably 1960s Irish craftsmanship. The knotwork is exquisite. See how the lines flow without beginning or end?" "That's what we were told," Richard said quietly. "It belonged to our mother." Something in his tone made Romano look up sharply, his gaze moving between Rachel and Richard as if he were solving a puzzle. "Your mother? She died 30 years ago," Rachel explained. "The necklace was broken recently, and we'd like to have it repaired if possible. Can it be fixed?" Romano picked up the pieces, examining them under a magnifying glass. "The pendant is undamaged. That's the most important part. The chain can be repaired, though one section will need to be replaced. But first," he looked at them intently, "may I ask how it was broken?" "I fell at work," Rachel said. "The clasp caught and snapped." "Ah," Romano nodded knowingly. "Sometimes things break precisely when they need to. In my family, we have a saying, gold remembers its purpose even when it's been forgotten." He disappeared into the back room, returning with a small velvet tray containing several sections of gold chain. "I keep antique pieces for repairs like this. Let me see if I have something that matches the original craftsmanship." As Romano worked, Richard found himself studying Rachel's profile, memorizing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, the way her hands moved with the precise economy of someone accustomed to working with delicate things. She looked so much like their mother at the same age that it took his breath away. "You know," Romano said conversationally as he worked, "I've been in this business for 47 years, and I've learned that jewelry has its own sense of timing. People lose pieces and find them again exactly when they're meant to. Wedding rings turn up in garden soil the day before anniversaries. Lockets reveal hidden photographs just when families need to remember their history." "Do you believe in that kind of thing?" Rachel asked. "Fate, destiny, meaningful coincidences?" Romano paused in his work, looking at her with twinkling eyes. "My dear, I've seen too much magic disguised as coincidence to dismiss it. Just last month, a woman brought me her grandmother's ring to be resized. While I was working on it, I discovered a tiny inscription hidden inside the band, coordinates that led to a safety deposit box containing family documents her grandmother thought were lost forever." He returned to the necklace, his movements careful and precise. "This particular design, the Celtic knot, represents the eternal bond between souls. The belief is that when such a piece breaks, it's because the connection needs to be renewed, strengthened, made visible again." Richard and Rachel exchanged glances, both thinking of the years of searching, the parallel paths that had finally converged in a hospital room at dawn. "There," Romano said with satisfaction, holding up the restored necklace. The Celtic knot pendant caught the afternoon light streaming through the shop windows, casting intricate shadows on the counter. The new section of chain was barely distinguishable from the original, woven seamlessly into the existing links, like it had always belonged there. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. The necklace looked exactly as she remembered it, from childhood dreams she'd thought were imagination. Whole, perfect, radiant with promise. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "More than beautiful," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's complete again." Romano smiled, carefully placing the necklace in Rachel's palm. "The chain is actually stronger now than it was before. Sometimes when we repair something that's been broken, we have the opportunity to make it more resilient." Rachel fastened the necklace around her neck with trembling fingers, feeling the familiar weight settle against her chest. But this time it felt different, not like a reminder of loss, but like a celebration of connection found. "How much do we owe you?" Richard asked, reaching for his wallet. Romano waved him away. "Consider it my gift to a family reunited." "But..." He paused, studying them both with the shrewd eyes of someone who had lived long enough to recognize important moments. "I have a feeling this isn't the end of your story. It's just the beginning." As they prepared to leave, Romano called out one more time. "The inscription you couldn't see before, on the back of the pendant. You might want to examine it more closely now that it's been cleaned and polished." Outside the shop, Rachel immediately turned the pendant over, squinting at the tiny markings Romano had mentioned. Richard pulled out his phone, using the flashlight function to illuminate the delicate engravings. "What does it say?" he asked. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. "For my daughters, past and future. Love finds its way home." "CB, CB," Richard repeated. "Catherine Bennett, Mum." They stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by the casual chaos of downtown Los Angeles, holding between them the proof that love could indeed find its way home, even across decades of separation and silence. "Richard," Rachel said softly, "what happens now?" Before he could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID made his expression shift from wonder to concern. Bennett Properties Legal Department. "Urgent." "I have to take this," he said apologetically. Stepping a few feet away, Rachel watched her brother's face grow increasingly tense as he listened to whoever was on the other end of the call. She caught fragments. Board meeting moved up. Questions about fitness for leadership. Hospital stay being interpreted as, when he hung up, his businessman's mask had slipped back into place, but Rachel could see the worry beneath it. "Everything okay? My business partners are concerned about my health," Richard said carefully. "Apparently, word of my hospitalization has reached certain members of the board, and they're questioning whether I'm fit to continue leading the company." "That's ridiculous. You had a stress-related cardiac episode, not a stroke. In high-stakes business, any sign of weakness becomes a target." Richard's voice was grim. "I've built Bennett Properties from nothing, but I'm not the only shareholder anymore. If they can prove I'm mentally or physically compromised, they can't do that, can they? Take your company? They can call for a vote of no confidence. Force me out of operational control." Richard ran his hands through his hair, the weight of 30 years of empire building suddenly visible in his posture. "The timing couldn't be worse. We're in the middle of the largest acquisition in company history. A chain of community centers that would expand our social programs nationwide." Rachel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the afternoon breeze. "Richard, what if this isn't coincidence? What if someone doesn't want you completing that acquisition?" He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean? You said every deal you've made has been about building resources to help kids like us, right? What if someone sees that as a threat? What if your hospitalization provided the perfect excuse to move against you?" Richard was quiet for a long moment, his business instincts warring with the emotional vulnerability of their reunion. "There is one board member who's been opposing the community center acquisition, claims it's not profitable enough, that we should focus purely on commercial properties. Victoria Sterling. She's been trying to push me toward a more ruthless business model. And now you're conveniently unfit for leadership right when the vote is scheduled." "The vote is tomorrow," Richard said grimly. "Emergency board meeting at 9 a.m. Rachel felt the familiar surge of protective instinct that had driven her entire nursing career. Someone was threatening her brother, her newly found family, and every cell in her body rebelled against it. Then we need to be there, she said firmly. Rachel, this isn't your fight. You've already lost 30 years because of choices I made. I won't let you get dragged into business politics that could affect your career here at the hospital. My career? Rachel laughed, but there was no humor in it. Richard, I've spent my entire life taking care of other people's families. I'm not about to let someone destroy mine the day after I found it. Richard stared at her, and for a moment, she saw not the successful businessman, but the 22-year-old boy who had lost everything and spent decades trying to build it back. You don't understand how ruthless these people can be, he said softly. And you don't understand how stubborn nurses can be, Rachel replied, especially ones who've waited 30 years for a family worth fighting for. The golden thread of their mother's necklace caught the late afternoon sun, casting tiny rainbows on the sidewalk between them. In that moment, Rachel felt something she'd never experienced before, the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Besides, she added with a small smile, what's the worst that could happen? I'm just a night shift nurse who happened to find her long-lost brother. How much trouble could I possibly cause at a corporate board meeting? Richard looked at her determined expression and began to laugh despite everything. Rebecca Bennett, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. It's Rachel, she corrected automatically, then paused. Though maybe Rebecca Bennett deserves a chance to finally fight for her family. As they stood together on the busy street, the restored necklace gleaming between them, neither noticed the figure watching from across the street or the phone call being made to report their location. The golden thread was about to be tested by forces that had been 30 years in the making. That evening, Rachel sat in her small apartment for the first time in years without feeling completely alone. The restored necklace caught the lamplight as she researched Bennett properties on her laptop, discovering the true scope of her brother's mission. Every project told a story of healing: community centers in former foster care neighborhoods, scholarships for displaced youth, medical facilities in underserved areas. Richard hadn't just built a business, he'd constructed a safety net for children like they had been. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Ms. Morgan, this is David Chen, Mr. Bennett's assistant. He asked me to send you the board meeting details for tomorrow. 9 a.m., Bennett Properties Boardroom, 42nd floor of the Wilshire Tower. Another message followed. He also asked me to tell you there's no pressure to attend. He understands if this is too much. Rachel smiled, typing back, tell him Rebecca Bennett doesn't back down from fights. Just like she never backed down on the soccer field. The next morning, Rachel stood before her closet, realizing she owned nothing appropriate for a corporate boardroom. Her phone rang, Richard's number. I may have overstepped, he said without preamble. I had my assistant arrange for some clothes to be delivered to your apartment. Professional attire. If you're still planning to, I'm still planning to, Rachel interrupted. And thank you, Rebecca. Yes, be careful today. Victoria Sterling plays for keeps, and I don't want you caught in crossfire meant for me. An hour later, Rachel emerged from her bedroom transformed. The charcoal gray suit fit perfectly, giving her the armor of professional confidence. But it was her mother's necklace, gleaming against the crisp white blouse, that made her feel truly powerful. The Wilshire Tower rose into the Los Angeles sky like a monument to ambition. In the elevator to the 42nd floor, Rachel studied her reflection, seeing not the night shift nurse but Rebecca Bennett, a woman with a family legacy to protect. The boardroom was all glass and steel, dominated by a massive conference table surrounded by leather chairs. Richard sat at the head, looking composed despite the circumstances. Around the table, 8 board members shuffled papers and whispered among themselves. Victoria Sterling commanded attention from the far end of the table, a woman in her 50s with platinum hair and ice-cold eyes. She looked up as Rachel entered, her gaze immediately dismissing the newcomer as unimportant. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard said, standing as Rachel approached. I'd like you to meet my sister, Rebecca Bennett. The reaction was immediate and electric. Several board members gasped audibly. Victoria Sterling's composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something that looked like panic. Your sister? Sterling recovered quickly, her voice dripping skepticism. Richard, given your recent health episode, perhaps this isn't the time for family fantasies. Rachel felt the familiar surge of protective anger. "Ms. Sterling, I presume? I've heard you have concerns about my brother's fitness for leadership." "I have concerns about his judgment," Sterling replied coolly. "Appearing at a board meeting with someone claiming to be a long-lost sibling doesn't inspire confidence." Then, "Perhaps this will." Rachel reached into her bag and withdrew a folder she'd prepared that morning. "DNA test results from an expedited lab, hospital records confirming our reunion, and documentation of our family history." She placed the folder on the table, her movements deliberate and controlled. "I've spent 5 years as a cardiac nurse at Mercy General Hospital. I've seen what happens when people let stress and greed consume them. I've also seen what happens when people channel their pain into purpose." Rachel walked slowly around the table, her voice growing stronger with each step. "My brother built this company on a foundation of helping displaced children and families. Every community center, every scholarship program, every medical facility, all of it stems from a promise he made to a 9-year-old girl 30 years ago." She stopped directly across from Victoria Sterling. "So yes, Ms. Sterling, I'm questioning someone's judgment today. But it's not my brother's." The room fell silent. Richard stared at his sister with amazement, seeing not the uncertain woman from yesterday, but a force of nature who had inherited their parents' strength and their grandmother's fire. Victoria Sterling's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Who exactly do you think you are?" Rachel smiled, touching the Celtic knot at her throat. "I'm Rebecca Bennett, and I'm here to make sure my family's legacy doesn't fall into the wrong hands." The tension in the boardroom was palpable as Victoria Sterling stood, her movements sharp with barely contained rage. "This is preposterous. We're supposed to make billion-dollar decisions based on the word of a nurse who conveniently appeared just as Richard's leadership is being questioned." "Actually," said a voice from the doorway, "you're supposed to make decisions based on facts." Everyone turned to see Marcus Webb enter, no longer in his security guard uniform, but wearing a crisp suit and carrying a thick folder. Rachel's eyes widened in surprise. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "Being more than just a night security guard," he replied with a gentle smile. "Rebecca, Richard, meet Marcus Webb, retired FBI financial crimes investigator and current private detective." Victoria Sterling had gone pale. "I don't know what game this is." "No game, Miss Sterling," Marcus interrupted, opening his folder. 3 months ago, Richard hired me to investigate unusual trading patterns in Bennett Properties stock. Someone has been systematically acquiring shares through shell companies, positioning for a hostile takeover." He spread documents across the table. "The same someone who's been feeding information to business reporters about Richard's health, who arranged for certain board members to receive anonymous tips about his declining mental state, and who coincidentally called for this emergency meeting the day after his hospital admission." Richard leaned forward, his voice deadly quiet. "Victoria?" Sterling's mask finally crumbled completely. "You don't understand the pressure we're under. Bennett Properties could be worth 3 times its current value if we focused on pure profit instead of your bleeding heart charity projects." "Whose pressure?" Rachel asked, stepping closer. "Who's behind the shell companies?" Marcus answered, sliding a photograph across the table. "Meridian Development Group. They specialize in acquiring community-focused companies and stripping away the social programs. Ms. Sterling has been their inside source for months." "You've been selling us out," Richard said, his disappointment evident. "Victoria, I trusted you. Trust doesn't pay dividends," Sterling snapped. "Your obsession with foster kids and community centers is bleeding money that should go to shareholders." Rachel felt something click into place, not just about the conspiracy, but about her own purpose. "No," she said firmly, "those programs aren't bleeding money. They're investing in futures. Every child who gets help, every family that stays together, every community that gets stronger, that's return on investment that can't be measured in quarterly reports." She turned to address the entire board. 5 years ago, I aged out of the foster care system with nothing but a broken necklace and a lot of questions. If programs like Richard's had existed then, if there had been support systems and opportunities, she gestured to herself, transformed in her professional attire, maybe I wouldn't have spent 30 years thinking I was nobody special. "But you are special," Richard said softly. "You always were." So is every kid in the system right now, Rachel continued. Every child waiting for someone to believe in them, to give them a chance, to keep promises instead of breaking them. That's what Bennett Properties really builds, hope. Board member James Mitchell, a man in his 60s, cleared his throat. I have a question for Ms. Sterling. How much were you being paid by Meridian to facilitate this takeover? Sterling's silence was damning. I'll take that as confirmation, Mitchell said. I move for Ms. Sterling's immediate removal from this board and criminal investigation of her actions. Seconded, said 3 other board members simultaneously. Marcus stepped forward. The FBI is already building a case. Ms. Sterling, you'll want to contact a lawyer. As security escorted Victoria Sterling from the boardroom, Richard turned to Rachel with wonder in his eyes. How did you know Marcus was an investigator? I didn't, Rachel admitted, but I've learned to recognize people who are more than they appear to be. After all, she touched her necklace. I'm a prime example. Richard laughed, the first genuinely happy sound she'd heard from him. Rebecca Bennett, you just saved the company. We saved it, she corrected. And now we get to keep helping kids who need what we needed 30 years ago. Looking around the boardroom at faces that now showed respect instead of skepticism, Rachel realized she had found something she'd been searching for her entire life. Not just family, but purpose that matched her deepest values. The golden thread had led her home. 3 weeks later, Rachel stood in the transformed community center that Bennett Properties had just completed in East Los Angeles. Children's laughter echoed through halls designed with warm colors and natural light, a far cry from the institutional spaces she remembered from her own childhood. The art therapy room was your idea, Richard said, joining her by the large windows overlooking the playground. Mom would have loved it. She would have loved all of this, Rachel replied, watching a group of teenagers work on a mural depicting their dreams for the future. Sometimes I think she guided us to each other just so this place could exist. The center was more than a building. It was a promise kept. After Victoria Sterling's arrest for corporate espionage and attempted fraud, the board had unanimously approved not just the community center acquisition, but an expansion of Bennett Properties' social programs. Miss Rebecca, a small voice called out. 7-year-old Sophia Rodriguez ran toward them, her arms full of drawings. Look what I made! Rachel knelt down to Sophia's level, accepting the colorful pictures with reverence. The little girl had been living in temporary foster placement for months, attending the center's after-school program, while social workers searched for a permanent home. Tell me about this one, Rachel said, pointing to a drawing of 2 figures holding hands under a rainbow. That's a sister finding her brother, Sophia explained seriously. Like in the story you told us, sometimes families get lost, but love finds a way home. Rachel's throat tightened with emotion. She'd been volunteering at the center twice a week, helping with activities and sharing stories, including a carefully edited version of her own reunion with Richard. That's beautiful, Sophia. Can I keep this one? Sophia beamed and nodded, then ran back to her friends. Richard watched the interaction with a soft smile. You're a natural with them, he observed. They're easy to love, Rachel said. They just need someone to see their potential. Marcus approached from across the room, where he'd been installing new security cameras. The afternoon program is starting soon. You both ready for the official opening ceremony? The past 3 weeks had brought unexpected changes. Marcus had transitioned from security guard to head of security for all Bennett Properties community centers, bringing his investigative skills to child protection. Rachel had taken a leave of absence from the hospital to help establish programs at the center, though she hadn't decided if the change would be permanent. Are you nervous? Richard asked as they walked toward the main auditorium. Excited, Rachel corrected. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I belong. The auditorium was filled with families from the neighborhood, city officials, and representatives from partnering organizations. As Richard took the podium to address the crowd, Rachel noticed a familiar figure in the back row, Dr. Reeves from the hospital, smiling proudly. 3 weeks ago, Richard began, my life changed in ways I never could have imagined. I thought I was building these centers to honor a promise I'd made long ago. What I discovered is that sometimes the universe has bigger plans than we can conceive. He gestured to Rachel, who joined him at the podium. This center exists because of love that refused to give up, because of connections that couldn't be broken. And because my sister taught me that the most important investments we make are in each other. Rachel took the microphone, looking out at the sea of faces, some young, some old, all hopeful. Every person in this room has a story. Some stories begin with loss, with separation, with wondering if anyone will remember your name. But every story has the potential for transformation. She touched the Celtic knot at her throat, feeling its warmth. This center is for everyone who's ever felt lost, who's ever wondered if they matter, who's ever needed proof that families can be found in the most unexpected places. The applause was thunderous, but what moved Rachel most were the individual faces. Children like Sophia who saw possibility in their future, teenagers who had found mentorship and support, families who had discovered community after the ceremony. As people toured the facilities and children played in spaces designed just for them, Rachel found herself in the art therapy room, surrounded by colorful creations from young artists. "Any regrets?" Richard asked, appearing beside her. Rachel looked at the walls covered with hope and creativity, thought about the children who would find refuge here, the families who would heal within these walls. "Only one," she said softly. Richard's face fell. "What?" "That it took us 30 years to find each other and build this," he laughed, pulling her into a hug that 30 years of separation had made precious beyond measure. 6 months later, Rachel stood before the bathroom mirror in her new apartment, twice the size of her old place, and filled with furniture that felt like home rather than temporary shelter. The Celtic necklace caught the morning light as she fastened it, a daily ritual that now symbolized presence rather than absence. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sofia Rodriguez. "Miss Rebecca, guess what? The Johnsons want to adopt me. Can you come to the celebration dinner?" Rachel smiled, typing back, "Wouldn't miss it for the world. Congratulations, sweetheart. 6 months of miracles." That's what she'd started calling the transformations happening around her. Sophia was just one of dozens of children who had found permanent families through the center's expanded adoption support programs. The art therapy room had become so popular, they'd added 2 more. The teen mentorship program had a waiting list, but the biggest transformation was her own. "Ready for the big day?" Richard's voice came from the kitchen, where he was making coffee for both of them. Sunday morning breakfast had become their tradition. Siblings catching up on 30 years of missed conversations. "As ready as anyone can be for their first board meeting as a full member," Rachel replied, joining him. The Bennett Properties Board had unanimously voted to offer her a position overseeing all community programming. She'd accepted on the condition that she could continue her nursing work part-time, unable to completely leave the profession that had shaped her. "Still hard to believe sometimes," she admitted, accepting the coffee mug. 6 months ago, I was just Rachel Morgan, night shift nurse. Now I'm Rebecca Bennett, board member and program director." "You were always Rebecca Bennett," Richard corrected gently. "The necklace never lied about who you were." They sat in comfortable silence, both thinking about the journey that had brought them here. Victoria Sterling was serving a 2-year sentence for corporate espionage. The Meridian Development Group's hostile takeover attempts had crumbled once their inside source was exposed. Bennett Properties had not only survived but thrived, with their stock price reaching record highs as investors recognized the long-term value of their community-focused approach. "Speaking of the necklace," Richard said, his tone shifting to something more serious, "I have something to tell you." Rachel looked up from her coffee, noting the change in his expression. "I've been researching our family history, trying to fill in the gaps about Mom's side of the family. The Celtic jewelry, the artistic heritage, all of it." He pulled out a thick folder. "What I found is remarkable." He opened the folder to reveal genealogical charts, old photographs, and historical documents. Our great-great-grandmother didn't just immigrate from Ireland. She was part of a network of women who helped children displaced by the Irish potato famine find new families in America. Rachel stared at the documents, recognizing faces that looked like her own across generations. She was helping orphaned children for over 30 years. "And look at this." Richard pointed to a faded photograph of a woman wearing an identical Celtic knot necklace. "The necklace has been passed down through 5 generations of women in our family, all of whom dedicated their lives to protecting children who needed families." The implications hit Rachel like a wave. "We weren't just randomly scattered by fate. No, Richard said softly. We were prepared, shaped by loss so we could understand what other families needed. You became a nurse who cares for people at their most vulnerable moments. I built a company focused on keeping families together and giving displaced children opportunities. Rachel touched the necklace, feeling the weight of generations of purpose. The eternal knot. No beginning, no end. Mom knew, Richard continued. Look at the inscription again. For my daughters, past and future. She wasn't just talking about you. She was talking about all the daughters who would benefit from the work we'd eventually do. They sat in amazement, processing the revelation that their reunion was part of something much larger than personal healing. There's one more thing, Richard said, his voice filled with excitement. I want to establish the Catherine Bennett Foundation for Family Preservation, a separate entity focused specifically on keeping siblings together in the foster care system, preventing what happened to us from happening to other families. And you want me to run it? I want us to run it, together, the way we should have faced everything from the beginning. Rachel looked at her brother, successful, generous, still carrying the careful hope of someone who had learned that the most precious things could be lost in an instant. Yes, she said simply. Let's make sure no other family gets scattered like leaves. Outside, Los Angeles stretched endlessly in all directions, millions of people carrying their own stories of loss and hope. But in Richard's kitchen, two siblings sat connected by more than blood, connected by purpose, by shared mission, by the understanding that love, once found, creates ripples that extend far beyond the people who hold it. 1 year later, Rachel stood in the main hallway of the newest Bennett Family Center in downtown Los Angeles, watching children and families move through spaces designed to heal rather than separate. The walls were covered with artwork created by young residents, paintings and drawings that told stories of resilience, hope, and the radical power of belonging. Miss Rebecca. Sophia Rodriguez ran toward her, no longer the uncertain 7-year-old from a year ago, but a confident 8-year-old whose adoption had been finalized 6 months earlier. My mom and dad want to talk to you about something special. The Johnsons approached, their faces glowing with the particular joy of a family that had chosen each other. Rebecca, Mrs. Johnson said warmly, we wanted you to be the first to know we're fostering Sophia's younger cousin, Maria. She's been in the system for 2 years, and we're hoping to keep them together. Rachel's heart swelled. That's wonderful news. How is Sophia feeling about becoming a big sister? I'm going to teach her everything, Sophia declared solemnly, about families and art, and how sometimes people get lost but love finds a way home. As the Johnsons walked away, Richard approached with Dr. Reeves, who had become both a friend and a medical consultant for the Foundation's health programs. The quarterly numbers are in, Richard announced, barely containing his excitement. The Catherine Bennett Foundation has facilitated the placement of over 300 children in permanent homes this year. And more importantly, we've kept 180 sibling groups together. Your mother would be so proud, Dr. Reeves said softly. Both of you have turned personal loss into systematic change. Rachel nodded, touching the Celtic necklace that had started it all. Sometimes I think she's still guiding us. Every child who finds a family, every sibling group that stays together, it feels like her love multiplying. Marcus approached from the security office, now officially the Director of Child Safety, for all Bennett family centers. I have the final numbers for the annual report. We're not just keeping families together, we're changing outcomes. Kids in our programs are 85% more likely to graduate high school and 60% more likely to pursue higher education. Because someone believed in them, Rachel said. Because someone kept promises. As the afternoon wound down, Rachel found herself in her favorite spot, the art therapy room where Sophia had first shown her that drawing of sisters finding brothers. The walls were covered with new creations now, each one telling a story of transformation. Richard joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the relaxed expression of someone who had finally learned to balance ambition with contentment. Any regrets about leaving full-time nursing? He asked. None, Rachel replied. I'm still taking care of people, just on a larger scale. Instead of monitoring heart rates, I'm monitoring hope rates. They stood in comfortable silence, both thinking about the journey that had brought them here. From a broken necklace on a hospital floor, to a foundation that was changing the landscape of child welfare in California. "I have something for you," Richard said, pulling a small wrapped box from his jacket. Rachel opened it carefully, revealing a delicate gold bracelet with a Celtic knot charm, not identical to their mother's necklace, but clearly part of the same family. "I had it made from some of the extra gold left over from the necklace repair," he explained. "Romano said it was enough to create something new while honoring what came before." Rachel fastened the bracelet, feeling the weight of past and future intertwined. "It's perfect." "There's an inscription," Richard pointed out. She turned the charm over to read, "For Rebecca, who found her way home and showed others theirs. RB 2024. Tears gathered in Rachel's eyes as she hugged her brother. This man who had spent 30 years building bridges back to the family they'd lost. "I love you." "Richard," she said simply. "I love you too, Rebecca. Welcome home." Outside, the sun was setting over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of gold that matched the jewelry they wore. Somewhere in the city, children were going to sleep in beds they could call their own, in families that had chosen them, in homes made possible by two siblings who had refused to let their story end with loss. The Celtic knot gleamed in the dying light, eternal, unbroken, a symbol of connections that transcended time, distance, and every force that tried to tear them apart. Love had indeed found its way home, and now it was multiplying, one family at a time.